Tonight on Politics Unplugged, the clock is ticking for state leaders to protect services for 60,000 disabled Arizonans. We talk with Governor Katie Hobbs. Trade wars, tariffs, and tax cuts. We speak with Arizona Congressman Greg Stanton about the latest happenings in Washington, D.C. And 3 of the Trump administration's top officials stopped by Arizona to target migrants and soda. That's next on Politics Unplugged.
Good evening. I'm political editor Dennis Welch. This is Politics Unplugged. The state office that supports disabled Arizonans and their caregivers has a budget shortfall and could run out of money next month. Democrats have introduced a bill to keep the office running, but so far Republicans are blocking it. And here to talk about that is our Arizona Governor Katie Hobbs. Thank you very much for being here. And Republicans recently are advancing their own measure to keep funding for this agency going. You are not in favor of this, and currently the budget shortfall is $122 million. They need that in a supplemental to make it through the end of the current fiscal year, which is June 30th. Why are you not supporting the Republican plan at this point? Because they are offering to backfill that money.
Their plan is a completely unserious plan, and I'm not the only person who thinks that. I met with families who rely on this program, who get life-saving services from this program, and who have been fighting for the supplemental funding to continue the program for the rest of the fiscal year. And these families also agree that it's not a serious proposal. And quite frankly, they are tired of being used as a political pawn. And that's exactly what's happening. The Republican majority in the legislature is leveraging a crisis that they created to gain some advantage, and this bill is absolutely a non-starter. And
you say that they've created this crisis. Republicans are saying that it's your mismanagement, obviously. This is a program that started during COVID. It was under the Ducey administration, and part of the major driver here is a program that pays parents of disabled children to care for their child, because it started during COVID because parents couldn't find caregivers to come to their home, and we've seen explosive growth in that area. What do you say to Republicans who are pointing fingers at you and say it's your mismanagement of this budget and this agency that's created this situation?
That is absolutely a ludicrous assertion. First of all, it ignores the fact that these supplemental funding requests are a routine part of budgeting. It ignores the over $3 billion of supplemental requests that were in Ducey budgets and approved under Ducey budgets in the 8 years he was governor. A lot of these programs, the budgeting for them is based on projections, and sometimes those projections are short because programs grow. This was an approved program. These are services that these families rely on, and we are asking for the same consideration in this supplemental funding request that has been given to thousands of other supplemental funding requests in the last several years, including the unaccountable, out-of-control ESA program that relied on nearly $275 million in my first year as governor. There's a $48 million request this year. They're not batting an eye about that.
And their proposal, we'll get to what you want here in a second, but the Republican plan, they're proposing some what they call guardrails on this, because currently parents are paid up to 40 hours a week to care for their children, their disabled children. They want to have that and cap it at $20 per week. First of all, why are you at 40 hours? How did you get to that? Did they need this 40 hours? And where do you think Republicans came up with the 20?
Well, first of all, I am absolutely willing to consider changes that protect the program and protect taxpayers. That's why I introduced some changes last week. And those changes have been under consideration for a while. We wanted to make sure that we were talking to the stakeholders, considering the impacts on the families, and absolutely willing to consider more changes that protect the program. What I heard from families that I talked to this week is that the 40 hours that they're currently, that our proposal caps them at, many of these families are assessed at and approved for far more hours. but they can't find the caregivers to provide those hours. So 20 hours is probably the minimum that most of these families qualify for. So 40 hours gives them, at least some of the care that they need.
Yeah, and you said you're willing to compromise or deal to keep this program. What are some of the specifics that you're willing to work with Republicans on this to get this funding approved to keep this department open?
Well, I've already announced some changes last week, including the 40-hour cap, including strengthening assessments to ensure that taxpayer-funded care is for exceptional care, and other billing practices that ensure that the program is working the way it's supposed to be working, and to provide better projections in the future. And I'm certainly willing to talk about more changes. The Republicans are the ones who have refused to come to the table to negotiate any of those changes. They introduced this bill without hearing from families one single time. Families who don't have the bandwidth, but yet continue to show up at the Capitol to advocate for this issue, for this funding, and Republicans in the legislature refuse to hear from them.
Are there any kinds of guardrails you'd like to see put on this program? Because you brought up ESAs, you're very concerned about the misspending of money in that program, but any kind of guardrails that you'd like to see or be willing to work with Republicans on this?
Well, absolutely, and I don't have specifics on those. We can talk about them, but I want to make sure that the families and the providers who are impacted by those changes, that they're workable. And so I'm willing to have everyone at the table to have those conversations. The Republicans have been unwilling to do that.
Okay, and where do you think this is going to end? I mean, we're looking at a countdown now within the next month. If this isn't resolved somehow, that funding goes away, and they're in some deep trouble. They're kind of left in the lurch. Where do you think that? How does this end?
This is a crisis that the Republican majority in the legislature has created by refusing to consider this supplemental budget request like any other supplemental budget request that's ever come through the legislature. It is ludicrous, and they are pitting these families they're using them as a political football to create this crisis and point fingers, where they don't belong. And Arizonans are being harmed by this. And they need to be serious about addressing this issue. Yeah,
and just to be clear too, for Republicans, they say they're concerned about spending and whatnot. Have you done any assessments to make sure there's no waste in spending with this program? Have you guys done any assessments like that?
Yeah, absolutely, and that's a big part of the changes that we just announced last week that are being implemented to strengthen that assurance.
All right. Well, Governor Katie Hobbs, thank you very much for stopping by here. Unfortunately, we're out of time here. And still ahead, President Trump's tariffs are wreaking havoc on the stock market. Arizona Congressman Greg Stanton joins us to break down the week in Washington when Politics Unplugged continues. Welcome back to Politics Unplugged. It has been a wild week in Washington with President Trump announcing tariffs and then pausing some of them. The overall result is the stocks are down this week, and here to talk about that is Democratic Congressman Greg Stanton. Thank you very much for being here.
Great to be here.
Let's start with the reaction, with the effects from the tariffs this past week. We've seen the markets go down. You have introduced a bill that would have forced Congress to approve any of these trade deals. Tell us a little bit about that.
Sure. First, to say the markets went down doesn't even tell half the story. We almost entered into a full-on recession as a result of the largest tariffs in American history, which equal to the largest tax increases for middle-class and working-class Americans in peacetime history in the United States of America. The markets reacted exactly the way it expected. People lost a good chunk of their retirement savings. And of course, when President Trump said, I'm never going to change this, I will go on as long as it takes, the markets tanked, the long-term bond markets tanked, and there was real fear of a full-on recession. The president blinked, which was the right thing to do under the circumstances, and took away, though, even though he said he was never going to do it, he did it. He blinked, he caved on the issue. It was the right thing. But that chaotic
and everybody but China. I mean, he increased the tariffs on that, and we can get to that in just a second. It doesn't look like China is backing down. So
yeah, China, as we speak here right now, China's at 125%. The United States is even going above that. So it is a full-on trade war with China. But the bill that I am pushing, as you mentioned, would restore the normal constitutional order. Tariffs are supposed to be put forward by Congress, not by the president. The only reason the president is doing so is he's declared a national emergency. Well, Congress has the authority to undo that national emergency so we can actually have a vote in Congress on these tariffs. That's what I have proposed to do. It is what our founding fathers wanted. Yeah. All money bills, all international trade issues are supposed to be led by Congress, not by the president. And so the people deserve a vote. And I know that if we actually got a vote of Congress, they would vote no on these across-the-board tax increases on the American people, but they won't give us that vote.
Yeah, Republicans, though, have shown no appetite to pick a fight with this president. I mean, you introducing this bill, I mean, you are in the minority. Is there any real hope that a bill like this could advance, or is this kind of making a political statement?
Yeah, it could advance. In the Senate, 4 courageous Republicans supported a very similar bill. On the House side, you have Congressman Don Bacon of Nebraska, and others that are starting to make noise because they understand, number one, how disastrous these tariffs were for the American economy, how disastrous they were as a tax increase on the American people, how disastrous it was for seniors that are trying to live off their savings for retirement, how disastrous it was for American leadership. The world needs a strong and steady and consistent America. That we are the leader of the world. Economically, we're the leader of the world. We're the most powerful nation on earth. And this whiplash back and forth, it makes our allies question the United States and whether we are really in a position to lead. And so Republicans know that as well. They may not want to take on Trump, but they know that this tariff policy is one of the dumbest, most self-defeating policies that we have seen in American history. We almost had a recession that would have been completely self-inflicted.
But to be clear, I mean, Donald Trump ran on tariffs. He's been talking about tariffs for 30 years. He made no bones about this in his campaign. This is partly a big part of his platform, and Americans, he's carrying that through, correct?
Yeah. Well, he also ran on lowering prices.
Sure.
And actually, the tariffs that across-the-board tariffs were going to be the largest increase in costs on the American people. So he's already acting inconsistently in that regard. He also ran on restoring American leadership in the globe. Well, acting in such a chaotic way. One day you're putting tariffs on our allies, including our next-door neighbors of Canada and Mexico. At a time we're trying to win this economic battle with China, we need to have closer partnership with our allies, particularly Canada and Mexico. So he ran on a lot of things, and he's not implementing those things, and that is unfortunate for the American people that he has decided to raise prices and stick a fork in the eye of our closest allies.
But you know, Donald Trump is saying that countries from all across the globe are calling him and wanting to cut these trade deals. I mean, that could be a benefit for the United States, isn't it, if he cuts better trade deals with these countries, right?
We could have done that from day one. So you are acting in this chaotic way, telling our allies that you're on your own and we're gonna engage in a trade war with you, and the result is you're going to have trade conversations. We could have had trade conversations from day one. In fact, I was elected in 2018. One of the first things I did was support President Trump on USMCA, the modernized trade deal with Mexico. I was one of the earliest Democrats to support the USMCA. The USMCA was a great bipartisan win during that time period, actually one of the great wins for the Trump administration. He already has a model that shows that if you engage in real trade discussions and negotiations, you can get modernized, improved trade deals. You don't have to act in a way which hurts American standing in the globe. So I guess if he's claiming victory that we're going to potentially engage in trade negotiations, you didn't have to start a trade war to do that. With our allies in particular, we can engage in trade negotiations and come up with a better trade policy.
And what's your sense going to be now? Because, again, it looks like we're at a tit-for-tat type of trade war, tariff war with China. You're on the House Select Committee on the Chinese Communist Party. What's your sense? What do you hear? How China? Do you think this is going to continue to escalate, or do you think somebody backs down at some point?
Well, we say backs down. Both sides right now are trying to up the ante, if you will. You get to the point where you're at 125% tariffs and apparently climbing on the United States side. We are going to have to get to the table actually with China to cover a whole spectrum of issues. Intellectual property theft, dumping that too often occurs with certain items into the world economy, into the United States economy. We're in a competition with China, and we have to win that competition with China. We have to be tough on them. But this continuing escalating tit for tat on tariff is not the way to win this economic challenge with China.
And real quick, we're running out of time. If this trade war continues to ratchet up with China, what does that mean for this country? What does it mean for your constituents?
Well, we have to be very careful. We need to make sure our allies are sticking with us. Unfortunately, what Trump did by unilaterally issue these tariffs, including to our allies in Mexico, Canada, in Europe and across the globe, now we have some of our allies saying that they want to work with China in response to the United States tariffs. If we're going to win this competition, when we win this competition with China, it's going to be because we're working more closely with our allies around the globe, not in opposition to them. That is an essential element. And the real fear right now is the markets are not seeing strong and consistent leadership from the United States. This whiplash back and forth means the markets are losing faith in the United States, and we got to be careful. That could lead to a recession. Strong, steady leadership for the United States is needed to avoid a recession here in the United States and around the globe. United States leadership is indispensable. We can't take that for granted. We need to start earning that trust and support of our allies, and also, we need to work to keep costs down, and tariffs are going in the exact opposite direction.
All right, gonna have to end it right there. As always, there's never enough time. Thank you for stopping by here, Congressman Greg Stanton. And up next, I'll be bringing in our panel to talk about all of this week's major headlines, including key figures in the Trump administration converging on Arizona this week. That's next on Politics Unplugged. Welcome back to Politics Unplugged. The Trump administration had a big presence in the Valley on Tuesday. The Secretary of Homeland Security, the Border Policy Advisor, and the Health and Human Services Secretary were all in town. Let's bring in our panel to talk about that. We've got the Republican consultant, Marcus Dell'Artino, and the Democrat here at the table, Matt Grodsky. Let's start with you, Matt. Let's say your takeaways from the big three stopping by here this week. You know, the way I looked at it is, immigration, border security, a big strength for the Trump administration. Numbers like border crossings are down. The metrics are all pretty positive for the Trump administration. And I think they wanted to talk about this, particularly here in Arizona, a swing state, to kind of change the narrative and get away from all the stuff we've been seeing with the tariffs.
I think that's certainly what they wanted to try. I mean, you've got Noam going around, not just here, but to El Salvador. And I think, unfortunately, she's trying to go for a Laura Croft kind of look, and it's coming off as a sad Kim Possible situation. What I find most intriguing is in MAGA world, they're getting tired of, their words not mine, the cosplay stuff. I think you saw Megyn Kelly go out there and kind of admonish it. So I don't know if this is landing the way they want it to. So I think there's an opportunity for Dems to kind of call this out, not dissimilar from the way Senator Gallego did this past week in terms of, hey, is this really playing with independents and moderates the way you think it is? I know they're interested in changing the narrative, but I'm not sure this is getting it done.
Yeah, and the numbers, when you start looking at the border numbers, it's pretty positive for the Trump administration, as I was saying earlier. And in fact, why not just tout those numbers? But at the same time, they're saying they've made big successes down at the border. They're also asking for and promising to spend more big money at the border. Doesn't that kind of hurt their argument? If the problem is getting solved, do you need all this money?
No, they're spending money to take care of the problem now, which means you're going to need money ongoing. I mean, there has never been anybody who disagreed with the fact that we need more Border Patrol agents. The wall actually has not been completed and has major gaps in it that still needs to be filled. There's technology needs that need to be done. So if you want to have these successes, you've got to keep investing to have these successes.
Yeah, and you want to get your takes too on, Kristi Noem, Homeland Security chief. She's out here. She's participating in raids. She took some pictures with herself holding a gun, some video of her going out on these raids with ICE agents and rounding up some migrants that were suspected of being here illegally.
Yeah, I think what will be interesting is if they stop doing this over the next few months. Again, I'm not sure it's playing very well. I think you could see a similar situation where he reins her in a little bit like what he's supposedly doing with Musk. I just don't think the El Salvador visit landed the way they wanted it to, the stunts this weekend. And ultimately, you know, on your point about investing, you know, she's kind of talking out of both sides of her mouth. There's $69 million that were frozen, that we're owed, that we need for border security and public safety. They're not releasing it. So I'm not really sure what their long-term game is other than just doing these photo ops.
I would just add that election result after election result shows that this focus on illegal immigration works. Not only for Republicans, but independents. And I would point out the Democrats didn't do themselves any favor from walking out and protesting a speech by the border czar on the floor of the State House this week.
Yeah, and I was going to ask you about those demonstrations and how do you think that played with the public at large?
I think it plays for their base very well, and I think that that's what it was designed to do. I don't think it plays very well for those independent, middle-of-the-road voters, and certainly those moderate Republicans that want some accountability on illegal immigration.
And I was going to say, you know, Marks makes a good point here. When you start looking at the election results last November, the Secure the Border Act overwhelmingly passed. And so when you start looking at those middle-of-the-road voters, swing voters out there, they were obviously voting in favor of that.
That's why I think the focus needs to be more on calling out the things they're saying and doing. I think the comments this week about, you know, turning deportation into some kind of an Amazon private sector service. You're seeing the situation with sending the wrong individual without due process to El Salvador. I think we need to be talking about those types of things. I don't know if the walkouts are as effective, to Marcus's point, with the swing voters in middle of the road.
And Marcus looks like he has something to say here.
Well, I just say, I think the border czar covered all of those topics in his speech on the floor, and I wish there were more people that would have listened. But when you talk about child trafficking, a disgusting thing that happens in this country, and the crackdown that these ICE agents are to find these kids, good. Go do more of it. Find these kids, bring them back to their families.
I want to ask you, too, Robert Kennedy Jr. here in town. Why did they send him out here?
You know, I don't know if you've heard this yet, but we're kind of a swing state.
So
expect a lot of these visits in the next few years, number one. Number two is there are a couple bills down at the legislature that are sort of right in his sweet spot dealing with foods, red dye, number 5, 10, whatever number it is, and all these products that we're sticking into foods. And I think that was perfect messaging to have him as an advocate for getting rid of those additives to our food to be there for that bill.
And your takes from Kennedy Jr. coming out here, and I didn't see him ask or press much about this growing measles outbreak.
Yeah, I'd like to see
Texas.
him pressed more on that. I agree. I think the school lunches thing, that's safe territory. But you talk about swing states. If this measles outbreak gets worse, particularly in swing states, it's in Texas right now, but if it comes to Arizona, goes to places like Wisconsin, I think you see him less and less out here on the stump because I think he could easily become persona non grata the same way Musk has.
All right, now I've got 15 seconds. I want to end with this. We had the governor on here in the first segment talking about funding for for this program for disabled kids. How does it end?
This bill gets vetoed. They go back to the drawing table. It gets funded. The guardrails are drastically different than are in the proposed legislation.
All right, we're going to have to end it right there. That is all the time we have. But be sure to join us next week for more Politics Unplugged. Good night.